The Okinawan sunset was a painter's dream, a violent and breathtaking splash of orange and magenta across the endless Pacific. From my small apartment near the base, this view had been my constant companion for the past 2 years, a daily reminder that beauty could exist in places you never expected to find it. At 24, I had carved out a life that surprised even me sometimes. I was a military brat who had grown up moving from base to base, never owning more than would fit in a duffel bag. And somehow I had become a cryptologic technician for the very institution that had kept my childhood in perpetual motion. The work was demanding, precise, and required a focus that left little room for the chaos I had grown up with. But my heart, my secret and consuming passion, lived 7,000 miles away in a sleepy Virginia suburb, in a place that represented everything my nomadic upbringing had never allowed me to have. It was a tiny two-bedroom bungalow I had bought 3 years ago, a foreclosure that had sat empty for months with weeds crawling up its peeling siding, and a for sale sign that looked as tired as the house itself. I had been 21, fresh out of technical training and stationed at a base just 40 minutes away, when I first saw it. Everyone thought I was insane. My dad laughed until he coughed when I told him over the phone. My brother Liam, 3 years older and perpetually between jobs, just grunted and said something about me not knowing what I was doing. But I saw something they couldn't. Under the grime and neglect, I saw bones that were good and true. I saw original hardwood floors that just needed sanding and love. I saw a kitchen with vintage tile that deserved to be restored, not ripped out. I saw a tiny overgrown yard that could become a garden. I saw a home. The purchase ate every penny of my meager savings. The renovation ate every leave day I had for the next 2 years. While other guys my age were buying sports cars they couldn't afford or spending weekends at bars, I was learning to tile a bathroom floor from grainy YouTube tutorials in the middle of the night. I taught myself plumbing from library books and electrical work from a retired contractor 2 doors down who took pity on me. I patched drywall until my arms ached, painted until my eyes blurred, and laid flooring until my knees screamed. Every callus, every sore muscle, every frustrating setback was worth it because I was building something that was entirely mine. The house wasn't just wood and drywall and copper pipes. It was my thesis, my sanctuary, my proof that I could create something lasting and beautiful out of nothing. It was the home my dad and older brother had never been able to give us, the stability that had always eluded our family. Dad was a charming dreamer, the kind of man who chased get-rich, quick schemes with the consistency of a mayfly. He had sold insurance, timeshares, and used cars. He had tried his hand at day trading, multi-level marketing, and once, memorably, breeding exotic birds. Nothing ever stuck because nothing ever required the slow, patient work that real success demanded. Liam was his shadow in every way that mattered, sipping Dad's beer, borrowing his cigarettes, and perfecting the art of the between-jobs conversation. They had perfected the dance of mutual enablement, each one assuring the other that their latest failure wasn't their fault, that the system was rigged, that their big break was just around the corner. They had laughed when I bought the place. "A girl fixing up a house," they said. "You'll sell it in a year when you find a husband." Dad had chuckled, patting my head like I was still 7 years old. Liam just grunted his agreement and asked if I had any beer in the fridge. I proved them wrong through sheer stubbornness and sweat. On video calls, I walked them through the refinished hardwood floors that gleamed like honey in the afternoon light. I showed them the kitchen with its restored vintage tile and the butcher block island I had built myself. I panned my phone camera over the garden I had planted, where roses and hydrangeas now bloomed in profusion. They nodded and made approving sounds, but I could see their eyes glaze over. They didn't understand because they couldn't. The satisfaction of creating something with your own 2 hands was utterly foreign to them. They had never felt the quiet pride of standing in a room you had rebuilt and knowing that every straight line, every level surface, every beautiful detail came from your own vision and effort. I made the mistake of letting them stay there when they were between apartments, which was more often than not. It seemed like the right thing to do. They were family, after all, and the house was sitting empty while I was stationed overseas. They could keep an eye on things, make sure the pipes didn't freeze in winter, forward my mail. It was a decision I was beginning to deeply regret in ways I couldn't yet articulate. My last call with Dad, a week ago, had been strange and unsettling in a way that lodged in my chest like a splinter. He had asked too many questions about the property lines and the title, his voice casual but his questions too specific. I had been distracted, my mind on an upcoming field exercise, my duffel bag half packed on the bed behind me. I answered without thinking, without the caution that should have come naturally after a lifetime of his schemes. A sickening dread had started to pool in my stomach ever since, a low-grade nausea that no amount of logic could dispel. That evening, with the Okinawan sunset bleeding across the sky, I decided to check my banking app. I did it religiously, tracking every dollar I saved for the next phase of renovations. I wanted to replace the windows, update the HVAC, maybe finally tackle the bathroom. My thumb hovered over the app icon for a moment before I tapped it, a strange reluctance slowing my movements. The screen loaded, and my blood ran cold. A lump sum deposit of $85,000 sat in my savings account, a number so large and so unexpected that my brain refused to process it at first. I stared at the screen, watching the numbers blur and refocus, willing them to change. They didn't. The deposit was from a national real estate escrow company, the name stark and official in my transaction history. My hands began to tremble as I navigated to my email, a horrible certainty already forming in my mind. There it was, near the top of my inbox. A final closing statement with a subject line that made the floor drop out from under me. The sale of my property at 214 Magnolia Lane was complete. The sellers were listed as my father, Kenneth Miller, and my brother, Liam Miller. They had used the power of attorney I had foolishly, trustingly signed for them 2 years ago, so they could accept a delivery while I was deployed. I had never revoked it. I never thought I would have to. The beautiful sunset became a blur of mocking color as the tears came, hot and helpless. They had sold my home, my masterpiece, my future, and I was 7,000 miles away, watching it happen through a screen. The first call I made was to my dad. Looking back, I'm not sure why I bothered. Maybe some desperate, childish part of me still believed there was an explanation, that the numbers on my screen were some kind of mistake that he would laughingly clear up. Maybe I needed to hear him say it, to have the betrayal confirmed by his own voice, so I could stop hoping and start fighting. Whatever the reason, I dialed his number with fingers that still trembled, the Okinawan sunset now just a dark smear on the horizon. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear background noise, laughter, the clinking of glasses. My voice was eerily calm when I spoke, a flatness I didn't recognize coming from my own throat. Dad, I just saw a weird deposit in my account. Something about selling the house. There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched just long enough to be noticeable. Then a muffled sound, like a hand covering the receiver, and murmured voices I couldn't make out. When he came back on the line, his voice was smooth and practiced, the same charming tone he used when he was selling something he didn't quite believe in. Ah, honey, we were gonna call you tonight. It's a blessing, really. An investor came by, made us an offer we couldn't refuse. Way over market value. We handled all the stress for you, the paperwork, the showings, everything. Now you have a nice nest egg for when you get back. You can do whatever you want with it. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. You sold my house. Without asking me. The words came out slowly, deliberately, as if I were learning a new language. Now, don't get hysterical. His tone sharpened immediately, the practiced charm giving way to something harder and more familiar. It was the same voice he'd used my whole life whenever I questioned him, whenever I asked for something he didn't want to give, whenever I dared to have a need that inconvenienced him. It's family property. We were just looking out for you. Besides, Liam needed a leg up. This was his share. His share. The words were a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a new and horrifying understanding. My brother's share of what? Of my house. Of my money. What do you mean, his share? I asked, though I already knew. I could feel the answer coming like you feel a storm in your bones. We split it, Dad said. his voice taking on the patient, condescending tone of someone explaining simple math to a slow child. 50 for you, 20. 5 for me for managing everything, handling the sale, dealing with the stress. And 25 for Liam. He's got a real business opportunity this time, a food truck. This is his big chance, honey. You wouldn't want to stand in the way of your own brother's big chance, would you? $85,000. He was talking about $85,000 as if it were a generous gift, as if I should be grateful. The house was worth at least $250,000, probably more in the current market. I had the appraisal to prove it. Done just before I left for Okinawa, they had sold it for a fraction of its value to some vulture investor who probably saw them coming from a mile away. Two desperate men with a house that wasn't theirs to sell. Quick cash for them, a steal for the buyer, and I was left with nothing but the ash of my dreams. Dad, where are you right now? My voice was still calm, but it was the calm of a frozen lake, hiding depths of cold fury beneath. We're at the beach, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Celebrating. Your brother's got a new lease on life because of this. We're gonna have a good weekend, maybe make a week of it. Listen, don't you worry your pretty head about any of this. It's all handled. We'll talk when you're back stateside. You'll see. This is going to be good for all of us. He hung up before I could respond. The line went dead, and I sat there in my small apartment, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Pretty head. The patronizing, dismissive phrase echoed in my mind, and something inside me shifted. The fear, the confusion, the sickening dread that had been pooling in my stomach for days. It all crystallized into something pure and hard. A diamond, sharp fury that cut through everything else. They hadn't just sold a building. They had sold my security, my proof of self-worth, my tangible answer to a lifetime of being told. I was just the girl, the backup, the one who would eventually need a man to take care of her. They had taken the one thing I had built with my own hands and traded it for a weekend at the beach and a pipe dream about a food truck. They had bet on me staying silent. They had bet on me staying broken. They had bet wrong. For the next 48 hours I was a machine. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop and my phone, and I worked. I got emergency leave approved, citing a family crisis and legal emergency. The officer who reviewed my request saw something in my face, something hard and determined, and she didn't ask questions. She just nodded and processed the paperwork. I contacted a lawyer in Virginia, a woman I found online who specialized in real estate fraud. Her name was Sarah, and her website promised aggressive representation and no-nonsense advice. She answered my call on the second ring, and I told her everything. The house, the power of attorney, the fraudulent sale, the $85,000. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long pause. "Send me everything you have," she said. "The deed, the closing statement, the power of attorney document, the bank records. Everything. And don't talk to your father or brother again until I tell you to." I did as she said, scanning and uploading documents with trembling hands. The next day, she called me back. Her voice was different this time, more focused, more intent. I could hear pages rustling in the background as she talked. "I've been reviewing your case, Miss Miller, and I have some questions. You bought this property as a foreclosure, correct? You did all the renovation work yourself. Was it ever your primary residence?" "For 2 years before I joined the service, yes. Then I rented it out for a year while I was in training, and for the last 2 years my dad and brother have been there, watching it for me. Or so I thought." "And you own no other property? No investment properties, no second homes?" "No. Just that one house." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but I could hear the smile in it. The smile of a predator who has just scented blood. "Then your home wasn't just a house, Miss Miller. In the state of Virginia, you have something called a homestead exemption. It's designed to protect a certain amount of equity in your primary residence from creditors. But it does more than that. It can, in cases of fraud, invalidate the sale entirely, especially if the buyers were aware it was owner-occupied. It's a powerful tool, and most people don't know about it. Your father and brother certainly didn't." We're going to hit them with everything. And if this investment company did a sloppy title search, if they didn't verify occupancy, they're in for a world of hurt too. They might be willing to settle just to make this go away. A sliver of light in the darkness. A crack in the wall of despair they had built around me. My home, my masterpiece, had a secret power I never even knew about. It had been protecting me all along, waiting for the moment I would need it most. And my father and brother, in their greed and arrogance, had just walked right into its trap. They thought they were stealing a house. They didn't realize they were trying to steal from a woman who had finally found something worth fighting for. I flew home in a state that I can only describe as suspended animation. The 14-hour flight passed in a blur of recycled air and numb contemplation, my body in one place while my mind raced through 1,000 possible scenarios. When I finally landed at Dulles International, the humidity of a Virginia summer hit me like a wall, so different from the salt, tinged breeze of Okinawa that it felt like landing on another planet. My lawyer, Sarah, was waiting for me just past security, a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses and a briefcase that looked like it could double as a weapon in a pinch. She didn't offer small talk or meaningless comfort. She just nodded once, assessed me with a quick glance, and said, "Let's go to work." We went straight to the courthouse in the county where my house sat, a sprawling stone building that smelled like floor wax and old paper. Sarah moved through the hallways with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times, her heels clicking against the marble floors in a steady rhythm that I found strangely comforting. We filed an emergency injunction to freeze the funds from the sale and to halt the transfer of the deed. The clerk, a woman who looked like she had seen every kind of human drama play out in those hallways, barely blinked at our paperwork. She stamped it, filed it, and told us we would have a hearing in 3 days. 3 days. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. In the car on the way to my hotel, Sarah explained the strategy in detail, her voice calm and clinical. The buyer is a limited liability corporation that flips houses. They've been operating in this area for about 5 years, mostly targeting distressed properties. They paid cash, well below market value. And from what I can tell from the closing documents, they didn't require your father and brother to provide a notarized affidavit of occupancy. That's standard practice. Any legitimate buyer would have demanded it. The fact that they didn't tells me they either didn't care or they knew exactly what was happening. Either way, it's our leverage. They don't want to fight. They want to flip the house and move on. We're going to make it very clear that fighting us will be more expensive than walking away. I nodded, taking it all in, but my mind was elsewhere. It was on my father and brother, on the motel Sarah had tracked them to on the Virginia coast. She had found them through credit card records, the kind of detail-oriented detective work that made me grateful I had chosen her. They were still at the beach. Still celebrating, still spending money that wasn't theirs. They didn't know I was back. They didn't know about the injunction. They didn't know that their world was about to collapse around them. I didn't call ahead. I didn't give them warning. I just rented a car the next morning and drove 2 hours to a seedy motel off a highway exit, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and doors that opened directly onto parking lots, full of pickup trucks and beat-up sedans. The salt air from the ocean mingled with the smell of frying grease from a fast food restaurant next door. I found their room number from the front desk clerk, who didn't ask questions after I slipped him $40. I stood outside that door for a long moment, my hand raised to knock, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I knocked. Liam opened the door. He was holding a beer, wearing a stained t-shirt and board shorts, and he reeked of cheap cologne and stale cigarette smoke. His face went through a series of rapid transformations. First confusion, as if his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Then shock, as recognition set in. Then something else, a flicker of fear that was there and gone before he could hide it. "Whoa," he said, his voice too loud, too casual. "Hey, sis. You're back early." I pushed past him into the room without waiting for an invitation. It was exactly what I expected. 2 double beds with garish bedspreads. A round table covered in fast food wrappers and beer bottles, the air thick with the smell of fried food and their particular brand of smugness. My father was sitting on one of the beds, watching television, some game show with flashing lights and canned laughter. Empty crab shells and beer bottles covered every available surface. They had been living high on my money, feasting on the carcass of my dreams. The money is frozen, I said, my voice flat and calm. It was the calm of deep water, of reservoirs so cold that nothing could disturb their surface. And I'm suing to nullify the sale. My father sat up slowly, his face cycling through confusion, then indignation, then settling on the practiced charm that was his default setting in any crisis. Now, hold on just a minute here, he said, holding up his hands as if to calm a spooked horse. There's no need for all that legal mumbo-jumbo. We were going to give you your cut. We just haven't had a chance to transfer it yet. You know how these things work. Money takes time to move around. My cut. I laughed, and the sound that came out of my mouth was hollow and broken, the laugh of someone who has passed through shock and landed somewhere on the other side. You stole my house. You sold it for $170,000, less than it's worth. You took my future and tried to pawn it for a food truck and a weekend at the beach eating crabs and drinking cheap beer. My cut would have been the whole thing if you hadn't decided to help yourselves to what wasn't yours. Liam stepped forward then, his face reddening, his beer bottle clutched in his hand like a prop. Don't you come in here with that attitude, he said, his voice rising. Dad and I have been taking care of that place for years. We mowed the lawn. We fixed the toilet that one time. We earned that money. You were off playing soldier in Japan or wherever, having adventures, seeing the world. We were stuck here, holding down the fort. We're family. What's yours is ours. That's how it works. Playing soldier. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't let it show. 3 years of service, of deployments, of sacrifice, and he reduced it to playing. Just like my father had always reduced my accomplishments to hobbies, my dreams to whims, my hard work to luck. I looked at them, these two men who were supposed to love me, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't family. They were parasites who had finally found a host rich enough to sustain them, and they couldn't understand why the host was fighting back. The house is still legally mine, I said, turning toward the door. I had seen what I needed to see. I had heard what I needed to hear. The sale was fraudulent, and thanks to Virginia law, the house is going to be returned to me. You won't get a dime. And if the state decides to press criminal charges, you'll be lucky if you only have to deal with the debt. Fraud is a felony. You might want to think about that while you're finishing your vacation. As I reached the door, my father's voice stopped me. It had lost its charm entirely now, replaced by something hard and bitter and utterly familiar. You'll never make it on your own, he called after me. You're just a girl playing house. You don't know anything about the real world. You need us. You'll come crawling back. They always do. I walked out into the salty night air without looking back. His words followed me across the parking lot, past the flickering neon sign, all the way to my rental car. For a moment, just a moment, they stung. For a moment, I was 7 years old again, standing in front of him with a good report card, desperate for him to look up from his beer and tell me he was proud. For a moment, I was 15, working my first job, hoping he might notice that I was different from him, that I was trying to build something better. But then I remembered the feeling of laying that first tile in my house, the pride of planting those first flowers, the quiet hum of contentment I felt when I sat alone in my living room and knew that everything around me came from my own vision and effort. No, I wouldn't crawl back. I was done crawling. I was done hoping. I was done being the girl who needed their approval. From this moment on, I was something else entirely. I just hadn't figured out what yet. The legal battle stretched across 6 months like a slow, moving storm, one that gathered intensity the longer it lasted. It consumed my leave days, my savings, and more emotional energy than I knew I possessed. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all pressed down on me so heavily that I could barely get out of bed. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my Okinawan apartment, replaying every conversation, every document, every legal strategy session with Sarah, wondering if any of it would matter in the end. But giving up wasn't something I knew how to do anymore. They had taught me that, my father and brother, through years of neglect and dismissal. They had taught me that the only person who would ever fight for me was me. The house, flipping company that had bought my home turned out to be exactly what Sarah had predicted. They were a small operation. 3 guys with more ambition than ethics, who made their living by finding distressed properties and distressed sellers and squeezing profits from the space between. When Sarah hit them with the fraud claim and the news about the homestead exemption, they folded faster than I thought possible. Their lawyer called Sarah, within a week of the injunction being filed, and the negotiations that followed were less a battle and more a surrender. They had been negligent in their title search, and they knew it. They had ignored the red flags, the below market price, the absence of an occupancy affidavit, the obvious desperation of the 2 men selling a house that clearly wasn't theirs. A protracted legal fight would have exposed their practices to public scrutiny, invited investigations, and cost them far more than the house was worth. They agreed to void the sale, return the deed, and cover a portion of my legal fees in exchange for being released from further liability. It wasn't a victory that made me want to cheer, but it was a victory nonetheless. My father and brother's fate was less generous. The funds in their accounts were frozen by the injunction, and when the sale was voided, the court ordered them to return every penny they had already spent. That came to about $10,000, money that was gone. Vanished into a used car for Liam, a mountain of seafood dinners, and the partial payment of some of my father's oldest credit card debts. They had to sell the car, drain what was left of their accounts, and they still came up short. The court entered a judgment against them for the remaining balance. A debt that would follow them for years, accruing interest, appearing on credit reports, a permanent scar from their moment of greed. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a shared apartment in a part of town that even they, with their low standards, had always avoided. I didn't gloat when Sarah told me. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt empty, and then, slowly, I felt something else. I felt free. I didn't go back to the house right away. I couldn't. The thought of walking through those rooms, of seeing the evidence of what they had done, of feeling their presence in the space that had been my sanctuary, was more than I could bear. Instead, I returned to Okinawa and finished my tour. I threw myself into my work with an intensity that surprised even me. I took on extra shifts, volunteered for difficult assignments, stayed late and arrived early. The work was precise and demanding, requiring a focus that left no room for the churn of emotion that still lived just beneath the surface. My superiors noticed. My peers respected me. 6 months after the legal battle ended, I earned a promotion that came with more responsibility and a pay raise that felt like validation. I was earning back the part of myself that had felt foolish and small, the part that wondered if maybe they had been right. Maybe I couldn't make it on my own. With every successful mission, every completed task, every moment of competence, I proved to myself that their voices were lies. When I finally came home for good, I drove straight from the airport to 214 Magnolia Lane without stopping. I sat in my rental car for a long time, just looking at it. The house that had cost me so much. The house that had taught me so much. The house that was, against all odds, still mine. I walked up the driveway with a new set of keys in my hand, keys that represented not just ownership but survival. The first thing I noticed was the for sale sign still stuck in the front yard, now faded and crooked. The second thing I noticed was the damage. The flippers had done nothing but trash the place. They had started demolition and then abandoned it mid-project when the legal fight began. The beautiful hardwood floors I had sanded and sealed with my own hands were scarred and gouged, covered in a layer of dust and debris. The kitchen tile I had carefully restored was smashed in places, missing entirely in others, leaving bare subfloor exposed to the elements through a broken window. My garden, my beautiful garden that I had planted and tended with such care, was a weed-choked mess, the roses strangled by bindweed. the hydrangeas reduced to bare sticks. The walls I had painted were marred with graffiti, crude drawings left by workers who saw no reason to respect a place that was caught up in someone else's drama. It was a ruin. But it was my ruin. This time, I wasn't a scared girl, trying to prove something to people who would never be impressed. I wasn't the 21-year-old who bought a foreclosure because she needed to prove she could build something. I was a woman who had faced down the people who were supposed to love her, and won. I was a veteran with a steady income and a core of steel that had been forged in the hottest fire. I was someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that I could handle whatever came next. I rebuilt it. Slower this time, with more care, with the patience that comes from knowing that some things can't be rushed. I learned to install drywall, watching videos and reading books, and making mistakes that I fixed and learned from. I laid new floors, choosing materials that were better than the originals, materials that would last. I designed a kitchen that was even better than the last one, with modern appliances and custom cabinets, and a layout that made sense for how I actually lived. I rebuilt the garden from scratch, amending the soil, choosing plants that would thrive, designing a space that felt like an extension of the house itself. And with every nail I hammered, every pipe I soldered, every plant I put in the ground, I was building something more than a house. I was building a monument to my own resilience. I was proving, to myself more than anyone else, that I could take the worst they had to offer and turn it into something beautiful. Word got around town. People remembered the story, remembered the scandal of the sale, remembered the young woman who had fought back and won. The hardware store guy, an older man named Carl who had helped me pick out paint colors years ago, gave me a veteran's discount without me even asking. A local carpenter named Mike, impressed by the quality of my work on the drywall, offered to help with the framing in exchange for me helping him with his bookkeeping, a skill I had picked up in the service. A neighbor 2 doors down, a retired teacher named Eleanor, brought me cookies and told me she was glad I was home. I wasn't alone. I had built a community, not from blood, but from mutual respect and shared humanity. It was better than family. It was chosen. It was real. 2 years passed, though sometimes it felt like a lifetime and other times like the blink of an eye. The house at 214 Magnolia Lane had transformed again, this time into something I had only ever dreamed of during those long nights in Okinawa, when the weight of betrayal felt unbearable. The ruined walls were now smooth and painted in warm, inviting colors I had chosen myself. The scarred floors had been replaced with wide, plank oak that gleamed under the afternoon sun. The kitchen, with its modern appliances and custom cabinets, and the vintage tile I had painstakingly restored as a nod to the house's history, was the heart of the home, a place where I actually wanted to cook and linger and live. The garden had exploded into a riot of color, roses and hydrangeas and lavender and herbs all coexisting in carefully planned chaos that looked natural but was anything but. It was a showpiece, not because I had set out to create one, but because I had built it with love and patience, and the kind of attention that only comes from truly caring about the result. A local lifestyle magazine wanted to do a feature on it. The editor had heard about the house through a friend of a friend, the way these things often happen in small communities, and she had driven past one day and stopped to take pictures. Those pictures had made their way to her office, and then to a meeting, and then to a phone call asking if I would be interested in being profiled. The angle they wanted was obvious but irresistible. The comeback house, they were calling it. How a young veteran turned betrayal into beauty. I hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted that kind of attention, unsure if I wanted my story spread across glossy pages for strangers to consume. But then I thought about my father and brother, about how they had always dismissed my work as unimportant, about how they had never believed I could create anything lasting. And I said yes. Not for them, but for me. For the girl who had laid that first tile with trembling hands. For the woman who had fought back and won. The day the photographer came was one of those perfect Virginia autumn afternoons when the light turns golden and the air smells like fallen leaves and wood smoke. I was in the garden, deadheading the last of the roses, when a beat-up sedan pulled up to the curb and parked. I didn't recognize the car at first, but something about the way it sat there, engine running, made me look closer. The driver's door opened slowly, and my father got out. He looked old in a way that shocked me, diminished in a way that went far beyond the 2 years since I had seen him last. His clothes were wrinkled and too thin for the weather. His face lined and hollow, his eyes carrying a weight I had never seen in them before. He walked up the new stone path I had laid myself, stopping at the foot of the porch steps, as if an invisible barrier prevented him from going further. He looked at the house, then at me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. "It's beautiful, honey," he finally said, and his voice cracked on the words. It was the first time I could remember him calling me that without sarcasm, without the dismissive edge that had always colored his endearments. "You did good. You really did good." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed over my chest, and looked at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't invite him in. I just waited. "Liam's in trouble," he continued, his eyes dropping to the ground, unable to meet mine. "Real trouble this time. The food truck thing fell apart, obviously, and then he got mixed up with some people he shouldn't have. There's debt and worse, and we're going to lose our apartment. We've got nowhere to go." I was wondering, he paused, swallowed hard, forced himself to look up at me. "I was wondering if maybe we could stay here for a while, just until we get back on our feet. We're family, and family takes care of each other. You know that." I looked at this man, my father, and for a long moment I let myself feel everything. The little girl who had loved him anyway, who had always made excuses for him, who had desperately wanted his approval, that girl was still in here somewhere. I could feel her stirring, could feel the old familiar pull of duty and guilt, and the hope that maybe this time would be different. But I could also feel the woman she had become. The woman forged in the fire of their betrayal, the woman who had rebuilt her life from rubble, while they drank and skimmed, and spent what wasn't theirs. I remembered the feeling of my world, crumbling 7,000 miles away, watching it happen through a screen. I remembered the smugness in that motel room, the crabs in the beer and the complete lack of remorse. I remembered his parting shot as I walked out the door. "You'll come crawling back. They always do." I smiled at him then, and it wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't vengeful or triumphant. It was simply the smile of someone who has finally, completely, and irrevocably understood something important. It was the smile of someone who knows her own worth and will never again let anyone convince her otherwise. "No, Dad," I said softly. "You won't?" He looked up, a flicker of indignation in his eyes, the old defensiveness rising despite everything. "What do you mean? We're family. You can't just turn your back on family." "I mean," I said, my voice steady and clear, the voice of someone who has spent years learning to speak her truth without apology, that this house isn't built on the kind of foundation that could ever hold you and Liam up again. This house is built on my blood, sweat, and tears, on my service to my country, on my fight to keep what was mine. On every night I stayed up late learning to tile and plaster and wire and plant. On every penny I saved and every hour I worked. It's not a shelter for the people who tried to destroy it. It's not a refuge for the people who laughed at me for building it. It's mine. It's all mine. And I'm not sharing it with anyone who doesn't respect that. I stepped off the porch and walked past him, toward the photographer's van, which was just pulling up to the curb. The photographer, a young woman with kind eyes and expensive camera equipment, gave me a questioning look, and I just shook my head slightly. "Not now. Later." I turned back to my father one last time. "I hope you find help, Dad. I really do. I hope you figure out whatever it is that's been broken in you for so long. But you won't find it here. Not anymore. That chapter of my life is closed, and I'm not reopening it for anyone." He stood there, speechless, as I greeted the photographer with a warm smile and led her toward the house. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The little girl who just wanted her dad's approval was gone, finally and completely laid to rest. In her place was a woman who had learned the most important lesson of all. Your worth is not determined by the family you're born into, but by the life you have the courage to build for yourself. Being underestimated wasn't just the beginning of becoming unstoppable. It was the foundation, the solid ground on which everything else was built. And as I walked through the door of my home, my masterpiece, my proof of everything I was capable of, I knew that I would never be shaken again.